all the people who were there were passionate about volunteering. They'd been volunteering for decades at a time, and that's the same with some of you here. At that time, I fashioned a talk on just this thin of veneer of science that was existing about 5 years ago on what happens to someone's brain when they are involved in a serious volunteering. Serious basis. We're going to talk about that study, and now it's exploding, and there's going to be a bigger explosion in the next year or so with a Canadian study I'm going to be talking to you about. But let me first ask a question. How many of you, being courageously honest to me, have walked into a room in the last 5 days and forgotten what you went in there for? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of those who didn't raise your hand can't remember? Because it happens to everybody. And it is not a sign of dementia. Neither is losing your keys. That's a sign you don't have a system. You don't drop them in the same place every time. So what we're going to do is to explain to you some things about myths of dementia and Alzheimer's and myths of cognitive decline. And that example is a myth. You know how many things you can remember at any one particular time? 7 plus or minus 2 has been the standard, but there's some discussion, it may only be 4. But 50 years ago, George Miller at Princeton, a young professor of psychology, had a theory that he wanted to talk to his students about, and then his colleagues. He said, if our 3-pound brains have limits, there's only, it weighs so much, there's so many things it can do, is there a limit to the working memory? Those things you have to keep on your shelf at one time in balance. And he said, I think there is. His colleague said, no, it depends upon how smart someone is and how hard they work and all sorts of factors. He said, I'm going to invent something, and I've adopted that for years to explain to people that if you can't remember something when you walk into that room or even what you came in for, it's almost always because your brain was interrupted by something else. And here's how Miller used this. He goes to his students and he says, I want to demonstrate something. What I've adapted is to repeat after me. I'm going to count. I'm going to count 5 numbers. 3, 7, 2, 4, 8.
3, 7, 2, 4, 8.
5, 9, 6, 2, 3, 1.
5, 9, 6, 2, 3, 1.
2, 8, 4, 7, 6, 3, 2.
2, 8, 4, 7, 6, 3, 2.
Well, let's try 8 numbers. Who spoke up there? I was giving a talk last week, and a lady right in the front row, when I got to 8, she went like this. When you laugh, or when she does this, that is a habit that I want you to try to break. What she did and what you, the ones who kind of snickered, you gave your brain permission to fail. It's a habit that especially older adults get used to not even trying. If they're with their daughters, and daughters are the worst offenders, they love to help mom and dad through these crises of aging when they forget a word here and there and they start filling it in, and pretty soon dad doesn't even try anymore. Dad needs to say, stop. This is the human stop sign. Stop. Give me a chance. I'll take a little longer, but I'll get there. So I'm going to get back to, we're going to do 8 of them. Everybody try. 8 of them. 3, 8, 5, 7, 2, 4, 1, 3.
3, 8, 5, 7, 2, 4, 1, 3.
Okay, and Miller found out that everybody got 5, 6, almost everybody got 7 every time. Not everybody got 8 consistently. And when he got to 9, something dramatic started to happen. 9, here we go. 3, 5, 7, 2, 8, 4, 1, 6, 7.
3, 5, 7, 2, 8, 4, 1, 6, 7.
It starts fading.
Yeah.
When he got to 10, nobody got it. He couldn't believe it. It was like a cliff. Nobody got 10. He went to the professors, tried it again. He went to other people. There seems to be a shelf that has 7 books on it on an average day, and if you got a cold, and then it goes down to 5. If you're stressed, if you haven't slept, it goes down to 5. If you're on your best day, you've really got the things going, it's 9, 7 plus or minus 2. And Ma Bell adopted that as one of the reasons that when they organized the systems from the 3 cranks and a long and a short and odd numbers, they said, we need something that people can remember, because if the person gets the phone and gets the number from the operator and can't remember it, there's no pencil, give them those 7 numbers. The issue is that you only have so many spaces, and when you walk in that room, I walk in the room and I say, Leslie says, "Hi, Roger," and I say, "Hi, Leslie. Hey, are you going to that conference?" And she says, "Yes," and I say, "Okay, I'll see you there." And then I turn around, the books on my shelf got knocked off. And that's part of aging, because you can't predict which might be the important one, like I'm supposed to pick up my son somewhere. So what you do is you go back where you were. If you forget why you're in the room, you just go back into the other room. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that you know that Elders in Action is unique and not just in Portland. I travel around the country and I've never met a group that has so many people who are seeing this as something they look forward to. I want to volunteer. You're ahead of the curve, especially because the science is way behind you. I did a TV pilot series in Salem called This Is Your Brain On. And anybody seen any of the episodes? They aired a few years ago. They're still around the country at a few places. One of the episodes I chose was This Is Your Brain On Purpose. And the parenthesis was volunteering. We had various groups, Red Cross, etc. I wish I had come to Elders in Action had you come in the studio, because I interviewed a few of them, and every one of them, even a 90-year-old, when I asked them, "Will you ever retire from volunteering?" it was emphatic. No, they'll find a way. You know why? We think science is going to show because it's good for your brain. You get serotonin, you get dopamine, and the new theory is you get oxytocin. You get this chemical reaction in your brain. So let's see if we can make this work, and we can't so far. Luckily, I can just use my fingers here. Who's my guru? I was at Intel. You know, on the way up here, I thought, if this doesn't work, what do? I was at Intel, and I was doing a keynote. They had a brand new auditorium with all sorts of fancy stuff. This was back in 2007. And I got my PowerPoint ready to go and put it in, and they couldn't make it work. They couldn't make it. So they brought in other computers. They couldn't make it work. So I started talking to the group, and I did the count we just did and just talking with the group. And after 15 minutes and several people coming up and saying, "I don't think we can make this run," somebody started announcing that we're going to have to postpone the keynote. We'll gather all these people back again. And I said, "Well, let me try something here. Does anybody remember way back when they didn't have PowerPoint?" And I said, "We're going to vote. Who wants to go home or back to your offices?" Nobody voted. Who wants? We got a round of applause. So that's why I don't worry about this. And often I'll go off script, especially with groups like this, and leave time for questions. So it won't be. Do I have batteries?
There you go. It just.
No, I got.
I'd be happy to be your automatic. Would you like me to
Your
move it
remote's
forward? I can go sit there.
Yeah, yeah, you do.
Yeah.
I like to.
We do have an automatic mover forward.
Okay, these are all nice, and you'll see a few of these up here, and you've probably seen some of those that will empower people and make them want to volunteer. But in the future, and it'll be after this year, this round, the Bravo study, which you're going to just embed in your brain, the Bravo study out of Toronto is going to be the way that Barbara and Leslie can recruit people. And I always jokingly say to the volunteer organizations that when we get the brain science caught up with how good this is for your brain, they're going to charge you to volunteer here. Or Blue Cross and Kaiser are going to subsidize you to come here because it's going to keep you healthier. It's now.
We like that better.
You like that better. It's thought right now that if this pathway that we're taking the study of volunteering goes where we think it'll go, this may be the one thing that is better than anything else to keep your brain healthy. And I'm going to go through, if we have time, the 6 cogwheels of how your brain stays together. And the 6 cogwheels are what we teach in the course, and it's where the state of the science is as of this month. The new course on fashioning that starts the end of this month has some new revisions, but still those same 6 cogwheels are there. And when you hear them, you realize that's what you're doing. You're filling in some of the gaps that a lot of people who sit at home and watch TV too much and never get that chance to help somebody. That's the failure. They don't realize their worth is to go serve someone else. Next one. The aging mind, keep going. In fact, you sit down, I can do that.
Oh, if you tap me here, it has an electronic, okay.
Well, this is forward, this is backward. Okay, anybody remember what this is? Yeah. When I'm on the East Coast or Midwest, they say, oh, it's a volcano. You know. This group will be, anybody in the Portland, Seattle area knows what happened to that day that it blew up. You couldn't believe it. It what? Look at this. 95% of everything humans have ever discovered about your brain was discovered since Mount St. Helens blew up. 95%. And that's how exciting this field of study is. It's called the golden age of neuroscience for a good reason. You see, I think it may end about 2016 because there's been this explosion, and think of it as oil wells in this new reserve of knowledge that went down and it's gushing out, and the pipeline is full. But eventually, and I think it's going to be in the next several years, they're going to say, okay, let's just examine what the heck we got. Are these studies good? Is the one on licorice any good? Is the one, and the licorice one is a perfect example of, read the headline and beware. The headline in that one in USA Today said, licorice is good for your brain. So here's a picture of a man eating licorice, and it's going to be the pill that cures Alzheimer's. The story is that rats who ate a licorice root substance, and that substance, we realized after we researched it, never gets into the candy version. But they totally misled the public. I didn't do it. I should have gone back and figured out, did they get a blip in the sales just because of that? But it is a golden age in which things are happening like never before. These are the main breakthroughs in this period of time. First is neuroplasticity. And that used to be an odd word called brain plasticity. Now, every group that I talk to nods their head. It's rewiring your brain and every brain as long as they live. This is the brand new one that turned over every textbook on earth until one study came out in 1998. Every medical textbook said brains cannot regenerate new neurons. Once this was proven in 98, every textbook got changed, and often one of the people you're serving may have a doctor who graduated before 1998 who believes science stops when he or she gets through medical school. They still think this is the theory. Now, this isn't going to be the answer because neurons do generate in 2 places in the brain, maybe more, but they've only found 2. But the most important place that they're regenerated is the hippocampus. That's your memory maker, memory center. So if you know that, and you know how the brain works when it has a TBI or a stroke, that it recruits new neurons to go help out where needed. Well, the fact that you can get new neurons, dependent upon how healthy you are. That's the formula is the healthier you are, the more you understand how to keep your body and brain in shape, the more neurons you're going to get when you're 90, 95, and 100. Okay, this is another breakthrough, and that is knowledge is power. We use that because back in the Renaissance, this became a way to fuel people and to have an outbreak of knowledge on how to do things. And what we think is that with the fact you're getting new neurons and you can rewire brains after strokes, rewire brains to learn something new, structurally, architecturally change it, that you'll be motivated to want to keep learning and keep doing things that are challenging. You could be sitting at home watching the news, getting depressed, or you could be here. And the difference is going to make a difference 10, 20 years from now in your life. Look at this statement. This was a description of neuroscience a few years ago. And we took this one and we have run with it for years, and not one scientist has said we're not accurate in what I'm going to tell you in a minute. This has been described as the most exciting frontier of human knowledge since the Renaissance. And that bold statement is backed up by this. In the Renaissance, the only time in our history that there was this huge, massive explosion, we narrowed down to several factors, and these are what we think are the key, the most important two. One is technology, meaning the inventions of things that will allow people to discover something else. And the telescope is the best example. But the sextant, for instance, allowed people to sail accurately, so there was an exchange of knowledge that way. But as Galileo looks up with technology, now we're looking back at the brain in this new renaissance. The other breakthrough in technology that they had then was the printing press. Until then, it was storytelling. It was sharing verbally, orally, between humans. And there's a lot of things that can, play the old game of telephone and see what happens when an important idea gets muffled by either transmission through other humans, or even worse, when a brilliant idea is in one person's brain and he tries to do something with it, and somebody who isn't even born yet, maybe born 10, 20, or 30 years later, never finds it. But with the printing press, we have an exchange of ideas between humans and between generations. That's one of the ways that the new inventions and the human brain collaborating made progress like never before. But look at what happens today. Who's been in an fMRI machine or an MRI? Well, you know those weren't invented 50 years ago. Okay, MRI is going to take a photo of the structure. On fMRI, F stands for functional. It shows how your brain functions, how it actually sparks. It shows the oxygen level or the glucose level. Anybody had an fMRI, functional? Okay, then I can tell if I see your fMRI, I can. What's your name?
Roger, please.
Who is that?
Joan.
Joan! Your hair's short, I didn't recognize her. She was one of my star students in my Aging Mind class. Okay. In fact, she's one of the geronauts that I'll tell you about. Okay. Now, Joan, you threw me way off. Where was? Oh. I can see in her brain, if I have the image, I can see where she thought of something. I can see how intensely. I can't tell what you're thinking. But someday we're going to have a suite of machines that can go into your brain and give you a roadmap to make your brain healthier. That breakthrough is the equivalent of the telescope looking out, except it's looking in. And this is the biggest breakthrough right now in the progress of scientific ideas is the internet. Remember, the printing press went between humans and generations, but they still had to run into each other. This one, in real time, has allowed 3 places around the globe could have 3 brilliant scientists in Australia, in England, and in the US collaborating together. So when I read the abstracts now compared to a dozen years ago when I started, no longer are there clusters of scientists in one silo of wonderful research. It's the best and brightest around the globe working in real time. And the other reason the internet is going to help you and me is because instead of me having to go to a conference somewhere and sit and listen to these brilliant professors and try to go to libraries and find this, it takes me months of time to put the puzzle together. The same day that they announce it, I read it, I summarize it, and as Joan knows, the next week I can have that as an addition to a class I'm teaching. So it's a transfer of knowledge that applies to real people. When you have people like Elders in Action who want to know the latest, in the future, they're going to be go-to places that are not trying to sell you anything except knowledge. And that knowledge you get to decide how to apply it. So it's a golden age, and we're really pleased that this is the Renaissance period. Anybody know what a brain break is? You remember what a brain break is? Okay, a brain break is something that I invented years ago, and I use in every lecture, every time I get a chance, even on my online courses. We found that the human brain has a capacity to absorb knowledge like a sponge, and when you've got young people like Leslie and Joan and some of the others in the room, their brains can last 10 to 14, 15 minutes before they get full. Ours last 8 to 10, maybe 12 minutes, and they're full. Once they're full, especially if you're really concentrating and you're pulling that in, what happens is your brain quits absorbing and you forget the last 4 pages of the book you were just reading. You lose track of what that speaker was talking about. It doesn't matter how engaging something is, it's hard for the brain when it's really working. So we build these in, and they're not so many minutes like a timer. We put them in sometimes 3 minutes. If it's something that's easy, we'll put in 10 minutes. When you see this picture of somebody, who is this picture of? Anybody got a guess? Okay, I'll give you a clue. This is a picture of this same person. Okay, we use Einstein. So when we use visuals, we put Einstein up as the cue. Okay, you can relax. We're not going to go on until you've done what? Squeeze out the knowledge we just gave you. Refresh by doing something else. It can be anything else, and you've got a few examples here. What's your first phone number? Who's got it? Raise your hand if you remember your first phone number. Okay, we got several of them. Mark, what do you got?
503-778. No, I don't have.
Oh! Okay, but look, what's going to, just say, stop talking, Mark. What's going to happen is Mark thought he had it and it slipped away, and he cannot tell me honestly, I don't remember it, can he? He has to say, I don't remember yet. And now I teach the power of yet. When a person has encoded it, stored it, and can't retrieve it, they remember it, they just don't remember it yet. What's the hurry? And that empowers people who say, I can't remember. You say, no, call me tomorrow when it comes to you and you're out mowing the lawn or something. Okay, Mark, did it come to you?
Yeah, I blew the area code. 406-723-784.
But at least his brain skidded to a stop and said, okay, I got it. Okay, what was yours?
4670038.
Next.
755-9645.
You're right. Next.
8018.
8018.
Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Excellent. You're before the magic number. Last one, John.
914-358-2960.
Well, okay, what do you got?
I want to say mine was Ravenswood. Doesn't anybody remember back when you had a word and not?
Okay, here's what happened in the 50s. Once the 7 numbers were there, they decided, let's make it one step easier. And what they did, and what yours was Ravenwood?
Ravenswood, yeah.
Portland was
Ravenswood.
capital, wasn't it? No, yeah, it was capital, and Salem was Empire. And when I grew up, we were Empire, 33370. So the reason they did it is called chunking. If you chunk 2 numbers into one word, it makes it that much easier to remember. And so you only had to remember 6 things. Okay, next question. What's your first grade teacher's name? Okay, we got Sarah, Leslie.
Mrs. King.
Okay.
Miss Pickett.
Gosh, that's great.
Miss Lettvin.
Okay, all of you will get it. What's your...
Souter.
Are you leaving or are you coming in?
I'm leaving just for a few minutes.
Oh, okay. Oh,
You caught me halfway through. I'm going to hear this.
okay. Well, wait for the next one. Just a slide. Okay, last one, John.
Mistress Dorothy McFarlane.
Okay, all of you are kind of grinning and smiling and saying, I remember lots of that. Okay, let's go to this one right here. What's your first pet's name?
Polka dot.
Polka dot. Oh, Lucky.
Shep.
Shep, okay. When I was in Denver, when I've been in a big group with a big audience, and this is a big auditorium, and so I use this too to make sure we take a brain break. But I have to tell everybody, inhibit your frontal lobe, please, because everybody's shouting. You know, I just call on a few people, and so we put this one up, and they were good on the teacher, they were good on the phone until I called them. But we put this one up, and all of a sudden from the back of the auditorium was Peanut. I went like this. I said, are we looking at Peanut up here? And I explained that her frontal lobe is saying, don't say it, but the emotion, I ramped it up from a phone number to a teacher in the first grade to your first pet that you can remember. That's part of what's called the amygdala. That's the hard part, that's the emotional part of the brain. And that part of the brain is really important for cognitive aging and for you. What you do when you serve people as volunteers, especially when you're in a group of elders, you are having their amygdalas feel better, and you're exercising them and your own by doing something good that makes you feel good. So the memories of Sparky or Peanut, or what was yours?
Lucky.
Lucky. I could spend an hour doing therapy with somebody saying, okay, what did Lucky look like? Is this a picture of Lucky? Just think of what happens if you have somebody who's fading in cognitive abilities and also fading in joy of life, and you show them a picture of a dog that looks like Lucky. And it doesn't have to be somebody in a memory care. Get somebody in rehab who's been there from a broken hip, and you're going in, they're going to get out, but they're just feeling low. You start asking them some things about their favorite things, and it's the amygdala. Anybody know what the amygdala looks like? Hold up your thumbs, 2 of them. Looks like the end of your thumbs. They actually look identical to almonds, and they're right in the center of your brain next to the hippocampus, and the amygdala is your emotional center. The Rotterdam study in the Netherlands.
I'll get you some water.
Thank you. Oh, I got some. Did I serve some? Studied 2 parts of the brain in particular with the fMRI to find out if the size made a difference, and they found that people who are not having a joy in life, their amygdala shrinks, and they are at a higher risk of Alzheimer's. And the second phase, they had people do things that were uplifting. The amygdala grew because they're exercising the emotional part of the brain. Okay, these are the CogWheels. You don't have to write them down. We can go through them at a later time if my voice holds out. I've got 3 of these. I do a TED Talk on Saturday down in Salem, and they've had us working out for rehearsing stuff, and so my voice is going fast. Okay, CogWheels of brain health. We use the term CogWheels because when we started we had 3 and then 4, and then the studies showed that there was more essential things. So we call them CogWheels. We've got 6. We may add a couple in couple of years, but right now there's 6, and we call them cogwheels because they're so essential, like a fine watch, that if one of the cogwheels is loose, you better repair it. If one of your cogwheels doesn't have enough teeth, it'll still run. It'll loose, or it'll still run your brain. But if a single one of these 6 I'm going to show you fails, your risk of dementia and Alzheimer's and all sorts of cognitive issues will start going downhill quickly until you repair that. So don't get to the point where it totally fails. But here are the 6. And we modify these depending on the science. We modify them because the science changes every single day. 2 years ago, we changed physical exercise to physical movement. That was based on a study, a summary of studies in a book that was written by Gretchen Reynolds, who writes for the New York Times. And Gretchen went into the book saying, I'm going to get the science of exercise. What she found was that the first 20 minutes make all the difference. All the difference. And that's the name of her book. It's a good one. It's the best there is right now for a layman's version of what really works. But she also came up with this. I'm kind of jumping ahead in case we don't get there, but she said, humans were born to stroll. Stroll. That may be the best word to come up with. So what she showed was that when we were evolving, humans walked. They didn't run, they walked. But they walked all over the place. They had no cars, bicycles, so they walked. They strolled, not the speed of a stroller. They ran twice. So who can tell me why they would run? To get food, and to keep from becoming food. And that gave us a new model. So if you tell somebody that they can't run the marathon because they're too old, you can say, but at least you can walk for 20 minutes. You can stroll for 20 minutes. Mental stimulus. In fact, we're going to go through these, if we have time at the end, with a separate slideshow that is really packed. I'm actually putting about 3 hours worth of lectures into about a 20-minute roll through. So let's get that. This is all based on what happened to me when I was an activity director, got discovered by neuroscientists. They said, can we study what you invented? And I said, I don't know what I invented. What are you talking about? And so they convinced me that by having people engaged in life again, by doing things by telling them how the brain worked in fact-based discussions, you could improve their health markers. And after 3 years working with Western Oregon neuroscientists, I co-wrote a medical journal article way above my head, I thought, until I realized that was the first article of its kind that was peer-reviewed saying, no drug intervention, it's just have people engage in life and do things that are going to keep their attention and keep their passion going. The part that I think is the most important is why elders are the best teachers for scientists on what works. Too many scientists are going into the brain through a molecule or a molecular level, and we want them to go a different path that's now emerging, and that is study those that successfully aged. Let's figure out what our species is all about and how those that got that old survived. We often will use an oak tree. If you find that oak trees can live a certain age, and then you have these certain oaks that are much older, go find out what kind of soil they've got. What if you have a grove of oaks? Let's go find out what they're nurturing those. So these are some lessons from elders, and we call it the new age of longevity, the new age of aging. How many of you have been to a 100th birthday party? Okay. How many of you have already sent out your invitation to your own? Try that. Invite some people. And what we now know is that the age bracket is exploding so quickly that even Hallmark has cards that say Happy 100th Birthday. The estimate now is well over 55,000 Americans have turned 100, and so many of them are healthy they quit counting because they are not failing after 100. Why are they surviving and thriving in time? Now, there is an end zone, but where is that end zone? Our species has gone way past 100, and we're going to find some of them. I monitor every person I can who's an example of my species who successfully got through life. Sarah is the oldest American ever. This is a picture of her at 99. If she knew that she had almost 2 decades of life left, would she change her life? Well, she didn't do things because she wanted to age. She did things because she was involved in life. She had some secrets, and this is one of them. She ate 2 chocolate turtles every day. Hey, when you're 100, they will ask you, what's your secret? Well, she had 3 of them. Needlepoint. She watched golf on TV. She ate 2 chocolate caramel turtles every day. Not a pound of them, which would hurt her. So what happened to her? She died at 119 years old. So when I researched this, I wanted to know more. I wanted to know what was on her death certificate. I want whatever she had on her death certificate on mine, and it's a single word, and it's my goal. I want to have that word expired. It's on my death certificate because she didn't die of old age. She simply expired, and that's the goal. Now, when you have the metaphor of a species, I wanted to find out the oldest person ever, and that is Jean Calment from France. She watched the Eiffel Tower being built as a little girl, and a lot of you may have heard of some of the stories of her, and she's been so well documented that anything you read now about her is probably very true, including the fact that she learned fencing at 85 because she thought that would be quite fun. This is a picture of her at age 60 in the Great Depression. She didn't know she was only halfway through her life, but she's one of us, and she survived and rode a bicycle until she's 100. Now, she quit riding a bicycle when it became a little bit risky, but the reason that she kept walking the same path with her famous cane was because she socialized along the way. She didn't ride for exercise, she rode to get to the next visit, to the next person, and they waved at her. That's what the brain gets with the oxytocin of being with others. That's why when you go out as a volunteer, and I've seen you at the events that I've done in other places, you don't just sit there and say, do you want to know about Elders in Action? You engage people. They want to know that that person is a peer of mine, or that's a person who seems to really enjoy what they're doing. When Barbara said, can you come to a retreat, I thought, I'm going to tell you why that type of contact with somebody, especially if they're older, and they see you smiling and getting involved, you're going to have people come to you in the next few years and want to join your group. You're going to be mentors for them on why are you so excited to volunteer. 117 years old, this picture was taken. The story is that she lived in her town, didn't think twice about aging. She just kept aging, kept being healthy. And at 113, the city put on a huge celebration of the centennial of a famous artist who had come to the city 100 years earlier and painted some very famous paintings. So the town said, we got to make a festival out of this. It only comes by once. And one of the reporters was asked by a townsman, would you like to speak to someone who sold canvas to Vincent van Gogh 100 years ago? They said, let's talk to her. They met her. They reported what she said, and that was that Vincent van Gogh, I remember him. I was working in my uncle's canvas shop. He came in, he was a dirty, ugly old man. The significance, when the gerontologists saw that, they said, in Guinness's Book of World Records said, we need to document this, because if she's 113 and can remember a century ago, details like that, we want to write about it. She broke the record at 13, 14, 15, 16, and at 117. They said, let's celebrate her. You know, clock's ticking, we can't wait too long. Let's do it. So here she is up on stage, and she's just having a ball. A dinner and a gala that night. She had some things in the morning, but in the afternoon she was in this auditorium, and she was giving sound bites to people and the clips for their cameras and reporters. And this actually happened with a French reporter who'd already gotten his 2 bits in, and nobody else in the auditorium except her friends, and she was still just zipping with one-liners like, I only have but one wrinkle, and I'm sitting on it. Or this one, which really is brain science, I don't worry about things I can't control. And boy, you know how I use that? Turn off that news that this year has been so terrible. Every so often, turn on music without any word, just music, or daydream out the window with no sounds of all that trauma and chaos. And then an hour later, if you have to, turn it on and see if the world's still there. Because this serves somebody who was at least 117. So at 117, and move this over here, I want to show you what happened. The reporter comes up to, do with Sharon. The reporter comes up to Madame Calment and says, Madame Calment, thank you very much for inviting me to your birthday. I had a wonderful time. I'll see you next year. So what did she do? She held onto his hand, smiled at him, and shook it again and said, I suppose so. You look pretty healthy to me. Oh, when they got across the Atlantic to gerontologists, they said, we need to find out more about it. So they started studying her. They studied her with no machines that could see her brain because they weren't invented then. But they did do an autopsy. Her brain was the average of an 82-year-old female brain. She did something right, and we're learning from that, and we're matching with the neuroscience, the chemical reactions that go on.
It was the turtles.
It must, no, she didn't eat turtles.
She wasn't
That was the
a turtle.
119-year-old. But she had a secret. This is her secret. When she died at 122 and a half, when she died, she said, or before she died, she said, my one secret, and she stuck to it for years, is chocolate. Her secret is chocolate, and we're going to sample those in a few minutes. Her secret was dark chocolate. And it wasn't a large amount of chocolate every day, but it was a large amount every week. 1 kilo of chocolate per week. 2 pounds of chocolate per week. But you see her hand there? See what she's holding? A dime-sized piece in her hand. She ate small pieces of dark chocolate every single day. And that, we now know, after her death, the science is now in, and I'll tell you about it in a little bit, that when you eat chocolate, it gets to your stomach, goes in through your blood, gets to your heart, to your arteries, and the capillaries in your brain. It expands them, you get more blood flow. It's a perfect mix. And she knew it. She just liked the chocolate. 60 to 72 is the sweet spot, and that's what we'll be talking about. So, small pieces, if you like, who likes chocolate? Anybody like chocolate? Wait till you hear the chocolate talk.
Why are we waiting?
Because I'm not there yet. Okay, brain break. What do you call a group of lions?
Pride.
What do you call a group of geese?
Yeah.
Okay, we know lions because in 1451, in the Renaissance, I always go back to the Renaissance, 2 books were published. One in 1451, the Book of St. Albans, and one in 1460, a competing manuscript, the Book of Edgerton. Both of them are in museums. They listed these. This wasn't just out of thin air. A pride of lions goes back to the 1400s and the Renaissance. So does a gaggle of geese. Well, if a pride describes a lion, what do you call a group of leopards? Okay, I had those first 2 with you retrieving old memories. This is one, you're going to make a new one. And for an elder, we use this in a card game that we sell, that you're able to have somebody who says, I can't learn anything. They'll learn, and they'll learn quickly and love it, that a group of leopards is a leap. It's a leap of leopards. What's a group of raccoons? It's a mask of raccoons. And I'll get back to those in a few minutes.
So why is it a murder of crows?
Why is it a murder of crows?
Know that
because
one.
it's in the book. But why is it a company of parrots? Some of them make sense, some don't. Why is it a rafter of turkeys? Why is it a congress of baboons? And that's in there.
Oh, I'll tell you why.
There is one that I don't use when I've got an older group, and it's buzzards. You know what a group of buzzards are called? It's in our card set. A group of buzzards is called a wake, because that's the only place you see them in a group. Okay, well, let's talk about the science of volunteering. This is the hard part, and then we'll get to the chocolate. See if I can. This was the only study of any consequence, and it wasn't intended to be as important as it was. The Baltimore Aging Study put a longitudinal, everybody knows that longitudinal is different from a clinical trial that is contained. It's a 90-day trial or a 2-year trial or even a 4-year trial. Longitudinal means they're studying for decades. One of the components in this longitudinal study was, let's see if there's a difference between volunteering and not volunteering. So when you have a clinical trial, you have cohorts that are randomly matched, and they try to get this table and this table to live for a year, and they do biomarkers and tests before, and they do biomarkers after for everybody. This group isn't told what this is for. They're just signed up for the test, and they're assigned to then have an intervention. You don't get an intervention because we need this baseline group to be measured with, so we can see whether this group improved more than this. Well, after this group did the volunteering, both were tested again, and this group predictably just barely went downhill because these are people in their retirement years. This group improved on markers that shocked all the people that were in volunteering and in the longitudinal studies. And here's what they did. They went into schools on a regular basis and they read to kids for a certain number of minutes, so many days a week, and they tried to figure out what is it that made that huge difference. ARP then seized on this, and it's called the experience score now, and they're still using that model to give back in this formula that seems to work. So by going in, what do? You get off the couch and you physically move. Same thing you do when you go to Elders in Action. You then associate with people, which is social connection. So you got physical movement, social connection. You've also got challenges, and that's the mental stimulation. Remember the cogwheel on mental? We changed it from exercise to stimulation because you don't have to learn Chinese to have your brain get challenged. But you have to do something that is new, novel, and Michael and I added another twist to it. We think that with the studies I'm telling you about, the third thing that your cognitive brain needs in the mental stimulation cogwheel is purpose. Because if you have something that's challenging and it's something that is new to you, you could have a challenging crossword puzzle and keep doing it. They're good for you. But if you have something that's got a purpose with it, we think the studies in the future will have those go off the chart. And this is the first one ever to show that by having that purpose, you're going to have people who will show up. They seem to show up more than when you intervened with something else. Then, this always happens when scientists close the study down, they get the results, and they hear this. And they open the door, and it's the subjects of the clinical trial saying, can we have some more? That's what they did. They came back and said, we need to do more of this. We now know through a theory called the neurochemical cascade that what likely happened is that their brains during the trial had chemicals that were released, including the bonding oxytocin and the dopamine making them feel good, and they get to see the kids regularly, that felt so good and made them want more. That's a reward center that they wanted more, and so they devised, that's why ARP still has these going on, they devise ways to get them in. Now what you're doing here at Elders in Action is you are giving oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin the same way that this trial did. The difference is this is in a medical journal. You don't need to have a journal to know that what you're doing is right. So the Experience Core mission is to really make these opportunities available to everybody that is interested. And the Baltimore study then led to the Canadian study that I think is the most important. This quote from Gandhi, all of these really are nice ones to have, but this will not motivate someone in the future, especially the boomers, as much as the science saying, this is real, this can really help you. And then they'll realize why these quotes are really right on point. This is the Bravo study, and you will always be able to know this study because the V stands for volunteering. I've talked to the staff. We've monitored this study since it was commenced about 5 years ago now. And what happened when the Baltimore study came out is that the nation of Canada doesn't have any hesitation saying, because, and here's the difference between the U.S., because we have to pay for the elders to be cared in cognitive fail, and our socialized medicine has to pay for the care. We see this as a way that we can intervene, and it's a win-win-win. The people who volunteer win, the people they serve win, but we need science behind it. So they funded at the University of Toronto this study that would actually try to find out what are the provable benefits, what are the evidence-based benefits of a group of people who volunteer. They also are going to find the formulas. What type of volunteering does this for you? What type of volunteering does that for you? That way, we hope that eventually you come in with a new model and you interview someone and say, what can help you most? You match up the volunteer with what they need. And we think that's already being done by people like Elders in Action who don't just put somebody where they're not going to thrive. You lose volunteers that way. But this is going to put science behind it. And the area that I think may open up in maybe 3 or 4 years, I hope there's something in the pipeline, is this. Someone with a stroke who needs to rewire their brain through neuroplasticity and has maybe a language problem. It could be any deficit, but I'll use that as an example. Match that person up by having that person read to someone else or have that person involved, because every time that that purpose drives somebody to exercise that part of the brain, it rewires. And the neuroplasticity has a champion in Gabby Gifford. Remember Gabby? Well, when she was injured so badly, In the old days, the dark ages of the 80s and even the 90s, they would have said, well, there's nothing we can do because neuroplasticity wasn't where it is. What did they do? As soon as she was stable, they flew her to Houston where they had one of the world's best language, stroke, and TBI survivors. They had her sing sentences.
Yeah.
And she would not be giving speeches and talking in front of Congress if it weren't for neuroplasticity doing what it's doing. Well, that same type of wiring, not so dramatic, happens every time that you serve somebody else. And this study is going to show exactly, at least to the state of the art, that's going to show what happens when that comes into the scientific formula for wellness. The first study was released this summer, but it was an overview. It wasn't the study that we're waiting for. It should be released within the next year or so. When it comes out, these two are going to get copies immediately because I'll get it the day it comes out. They promised that the day it comes out, they'll send me an advance copy that I can share with a number of people on our list, and then I'm going to put it into our classes, The Aging Mind, because everybody who understands volunteering is going to benefit from this. This is a photo I took when I was giving a talk up in Seattle, and I stopped at a rest stop, and here were two people, and I started talking to them about volunteering. And both of these people at these two rest stops, the first one was by accident. I said, can I get my cell phone and take your picture? And I interviewed them for an article I'm doing on volunteering, and both of them had different stories. And that's one place where you just go to those people, they love what they're doing. And I told them, all three of them, I said, you are protecting your brain when you turn 99 by doing right now, building reserve for what you're doing. Is there anybody in this room who's retired? You are protecting your brain for when you're 100 and more. It's very likely that people that volunteer after retirement and continue to volunteer and get trained and go to seminars, you will probably push back that clock of cognitive decline maybe until the day you die. One of the challenges we have is to figure out when do you peak intellectually. When I started, in the literature it said the human brain intellectually peaks at age 40. And where is it from there? Downhill. It's down. Now, with all the breakthroughs, I started when I had nothing to lose because I wasn't trying to get tenure, but I'd be on these panels with these people who have all the degrees. And so we're talking back and forth with an audience in front of us, and I always get a chance to say, okay, does everybody agree that the human brain does not peak at age 40? The intellectual power doesn't peak at 40. And I get them all to say yes to that. And especially if I'm moderating, then I can kind of milk it. I say, okay, each of you tell me, when do you think it's going to peak? Oh, you know what the answer is for the most part? We don't know. If they don't know, and they really don't know, because of people like Madame Calamot or people like Sarah, that maybe with some peaks and valleys, maybe you can continue to thrive and peak the day you die. And that now is potential. And one of the real takeaways is a new study that came out of Finland 2 months ago that I'll be talking about in the TED Talk. The first time ever that what Scientific American called a gold standard randomized clinical controlled trial had a conclusion that said prevention of cognitive decline is possible. And the headline was, cognitive decline can be prevented. That's going to be the title of my TED Talk, which I changed as soon as I had already rehearsed this whole big bit about things, and this study came in. Finland took a group of people and combined different things, much like the CogWheels, saying it isn't any one thing. This isn't a sleep study. It's not a nutrition study with a Mediterranean diet. This is a combinatorial study, and we're going to see what happens when people who are at risk for failure combine the good things we know about. So the takeaway for that study is we know what to do, and we know how to do it in individual modules. What if we find a formula to mix those and have everybody do them at the same time? It's called the finger study, and you're going to hear about it in the future. FI for Finland, GER for geriatric, so it's the finger study, and it's one that we think is a game changer. And it's not a little study that was announced at some little conference. It was announced at the Super Bowl of Dementia and Alzheimer's Conference. This year it was in Copenhagen. The Alzheimer's Association International Conference is the one place that the drug failures have to be announced and the huge breakthroughs. It was the headliner. because what she did was thought to be impossible, and that is to put all of these different, what you can do together and come out with results. Now the results will finally be out in 5 years. But what Kiva Pelto and her group did was to announce it 2 years into the study because they were so dramatic. The differences were so dramatic that she got permission to say, this is not our final result, but we can conclude just on 2 years worth of modifying lifestyles, we can confirm that this group changed the trajectory of their cognitive decline, and we don't have any hesitation using the term cognitive decline can be prevented. The can be is important, and not will be if you sit back and just kind of do nothing. It's if you do these things. And they aren't difficult. When we have time in a few minutes to go, after we eat chocolate, to go through the CogWheels, you're going to see that you don't have to do a lot, but you have to do it the rest of your life. That's what my dad called a smidgen. And if any of you have been to my talks where I get a good chance to talk about my dad, he had some real wisdom. And when he died right after his second stroke, and he was a young man who died, but he smoked and he didn't treat his body as well as he should. But when he had his second stroke, and he always wanted to have a bumper sticker that I never got a chance to put on there, says, I have a 2-stroke handicap, but I'm still in the game. And he listened to these studies, and I'd come in and talk to him about it. And he said, tell people the power of a smidgen. And he, his kids, my 2 brothers and my sister and I would always hear him tell us why we need to do things. And one of them was that he told me often, he'd say, just do a smidgen, but do a smidgen every day, because a smidgen isn't much unless you do 7 smidgens a week. And then he'd hold his arms out and say, if you do 30 smidgens a month, you're going to make a difference in this life. And that's what you're going to hear later from me, is that if you take the finger study and you figure that it's on the way and it's going to confirm, but don't wait for it, do it now. You're going to say, I'm going to make sure that I find my weakest cogwheel, and I'm going to do a smidgen today. I was on a talk show doing some interviews, and at the end of the call-in session, it was the very end of it, said, oh, this has been a really good session. Tell our viewers what's the first thing they should do in their battle against cognitive decline. And I said, no offense to blondes, but there were 2 blondes sitting there, and they were very, very sharp. But what I did was I said, well, the first thing they should do is something. I looked at them, and they looked at me with these blank faces, and I thought, oh, no, no. And then it was just like 2 little light bulbs. Bing, bing. Oh, as opposed to, and they threw it back to me. I said, as opposed to nothing. That really is it. It's not complicated. It's choose to do something and then keep doing more somethings every single day. Okay, this is I've already explained this, but the types of volunteering are going to be explored through this study, and the results, I think, will be a model. In fact, I expect that the progressive and cutting-edge groups like the Elders in Action will use that almost as a template and have a task force of you volunteers with the staff and say, okay, we got the study, here's what it says, let's use this as the background, but let's get our own grid here. Let's get a way that we can interview people and have them know we're going to lead you to a path to a healthier brain by making sure that we're working together on this. So you may end up, in fact, being a petri dish for Nicole and her team from Toronto, if I can talk them into coming out here and using it. Okay, let's take a quick brain break and eat some chocolate in just a minute. But what kind of a car are those? Anybody recognize the car? Chevy. Dodge.
2 Chevy.
2 Chevys. What year?
Oh, 57.
57.
57. 59.
And the other's older.
What's the Dodge?
58.
You want to see when I put a Rambler in there, boy.
Yeah,
The car, when I was in law school, the car I got to drive was a Nash Metropolitan. Oh, I love that car. Okay, passion. This is something that I'm going to do before chocolate, because chocolate does have an issue with passion. It is, people are passionate about it. But when we talk about passion, we think that's something that all of you have for what you're doing here. You wouldn't be here. But what you're going to find is that when you get bored when you're 99, you need to go back to your original passions and figure out something that really was so important to you when you were younger that you lost track of time. When you used to do a hobby, you used to do something, your mom had to call you in when you're doing that. What if you're in a wheelchair? What if you cannot do the things you used to do, but you had a passion to do it? Understand, and you'll be learning if you do any of the courses online that we've got at PCC, you'll be learning what mirror neurons are. Mirror neurons were discovered in Italy, and they deal with how the brain works when it watches another human being or another moving object, but human beings all focus on. It does the same thing you're watching another do. You've heard of the term monkey see, monkey do. This is monkey see, monkey think. So I could be a quadriplegic who used to play tennis, who used to quilt, who used to play the violin. If I can get my cart next to the action of what I used to do, at about the same level of skill that I used to do, you can have that person in an fMRI watching that action. Their brain will be doing the same thing that the person's brain would do if they actually could play tennis or quilt or cook or play the violin. So we have something that you can do by triggering that passion. What part of the brain is passion? The amygdala. The size of an almond. What does the amygdala mean in Greek? Here's your lesson for the day. It means almond. Okay. When you do pursue a passion, that's different from having a passion. Pursue is actually go out and make it work for your brain's health. And if you've got somebody who you deal with, and I don't know all of the, there's so many different services that this group does, you may have a chance to have contact with somebody who really doesn't have any passion for life. They got no reason to even get up in the morning. What you need to do is to try to figure out if there's a clue here. And could you, the next time you visit, if it's Meals on Wheels, for instance, they might get a clue and you bring something back in. And part of what we're doing with a class that first of its kind ever in the nation that we premiere winter term, is called Cognitive Activity Design. It's not activities. We're not learning how to do activities somebody else invented. The students who are going to take our brand new online course will come up with their own ideas. They take brain health first, figure out how aging brains work, and then they come up with an idea of how could we trigger things like the passion for somebody by doing something totally unusual. In the final paper, they have to go out and try it, demonstrate it, and tell us if it worked. So we're going to have passion on the front of everybody's desk. And this is the true story. When I was an activity director, I found some photos, and I often will do deep training for caregivers or activity directors. Viola Smith had lost her passion for life when she moved where I was an activity director. And she was somebody in a wheelchair. Her hands were not, she wasn't, she had use of the hands, but it was really painful. And she couldn't walk. And I found out she was a quilter. When I was driving the van, I drove out to Paradise Island Park, which is a kind of a center where quilting buddies were. And I dropped her off. I had never been close to quilting. So I walked in and got her all set up, and I said, so what are you doing? And the lady who's in charge was taking a rack out. Everybody quilt? Anybody quilt? So I used it's called a rack, right? Taking the rack out of a closet and setting it up, and they all had their brown bags. I was supposed to come back 4 hours later, pick her up. So I hung around for a little bit. I watched them set up and chatted, and I said, well, what are you working on? This is Viola's friendship quilt. Well, what's that? And it turns out Viola, 17 years earlier, before she was stricken with MS and all sorts of problems, she made patches, no, what are they called? Blocks. Mm-hmm. She made a block and sent a block to all of her quilting friends around the country. Originally she was from Canada, but then she lived in Oregon most of her life. So all of her lifelong friends sent it out, and they're to stitch their name and their, I think their birth dates and some greeting for Viola. This, she said, would be her premier quilt she would ever make. She put those in a box under her bed as she failed further and further. And so she took them out and joined this group in Salem of friends of hers, and they agreed they're going to make this quilt, they're going to make her dream come true. So at the end of the day, I picked her up and I said, they were putting it away. I said, how much actual quilting do you do? Because I know you take a lunch break. Oh, we get a good 45 minutes in. And I'm thinking, she's not a spring chicken. She's never going to live to see this. So what I did, I was on a 7-cent per person per day budget. So I figured, hey, if I could have a quilting group come in, they could be an activity. So I talked them into coming over where Viola was. And what that did was to ignite her passion. What we did was to set up the rack in an unused part of the activity room, and I said, this will stay up 7 days a week, so you don't have to worry about setting up. You can work on it for 3.5 hours and eat lunch every time you come over. They not only came over and actually worked for 3.5 hours, but they had other residents who, through mirror neurons, were sitting there watching them quilt. Their brains were quilting with them. And then, within 1 week, I realized what was going on, and every time I came into that part of the activity area, Viola was quilting. And the caregivers at night said sometimes when she can't sleep, she'll go down there and quilt. Her hands were getting better. So what I said to her was, when you finish this, because it wasn't if anymore, when you finish it, I'll put it up in the dining room and we'll have a quilting show. Do you have any other quilts?
Oh my.
Okay, you ready? This is her quilt in progress. I was helping her. I said, we're going to put this show on when she told me that she was a state champion quilter, that she had made hundreds of quilts in her lifetime and has blue ribbons in a box somewhere. And all of her friends who she'd given these to brought them back in, and I called it a lifetime of stitches. So here we hung them up. We didn't just hang them up. We hung them up wall after wall. We had them in the hallways. So I put it in the newspaper under the art exhibits. I said, we have a quilting show. It was a quilting show as far as I'm concerned. It was supposed to be up for 1 week. We had 600 people in a month because we kept extending it. And the beauty of it is, by igniting her passion and having her quilt again, she was then the tour guide. So every time she'd get the phone and there's another person who doesn't know Viola, she got that juices of cognitive challenge to go out and talk about this quilt or that quilt. And it was one of those times, maybe the pinnacle of being able to say, having a good idea to as to how to ignite somebody really works. Then I went to the Salem Statesman and said, I got a good story here. They put this in the paper, and that additionally changed her life, because people who thought she was dead or thought that she was in a nursing home, they show up, and here are all these reunions. Now, I wish I had a clinical trial to have taken the biomarkers before and after, but I don't need that to know that this changed her life. When I spoke at her funeral, it was one of those ones where it was the toughest speech I've ever given. Was maybe 5 minutes, because I just kind of ended it. But it was because everybody there was quilter connected, and they knew the difference it made when you make a difference in somebody's life. And that's what all of you do. You find out one person, you may never see them again, but you know when you walk away, that person's life has been changed for the better. This is the science of it, though. These two scientists in 2007 came up with a hypothesis of engagement. If people are engaged with others, their brains will be healthier. And guess what they chose? Quilting. So I use that in my quilting TV show. I use that in my volunteering TV show, because quilters are much like you. They come to be with each other. Rarely would I ever expect an Elders in Action to be assigned as a solo. You go in groups. And that's part of the beauty of volunteer groups over an individual. This one came from Scotland, again, building off of the earlier model. And then this one's from Texas, comparing mental activities that are solo versus activities like you do that are challenging to do things. And the challenge plus the engagement is what she calls the enhancement zone. And by comparing mental activities, yours tops the solo crossword puzzles, computer games. It's off the chart. So follow the passion, and let's hand out the chocolate. Okay? Okay. While you're handing out chocolate, what I want you to do is not to eat any. They're going to be handed out. Just put them on the plate or put them on a piece of paper, and then wait, because I'm going to teach you in just a minute how to improve your sense of taste and smell by knowing how the brain works. So this, don't pay attention to the chocolate. Do not touch it. Don't smell it. Just put it on your plate. Pass it. Okay, what do you call a group of raccoons?
Mask.
Mask. Okay, what do you call a group of giraffes?
Neck.
Well, you got dementia? You'd be surprised. Sometimes when I have more time, I'll put this ringer toward the end. I've gone through these several times for brain breaks. And I'll put the giraffes, and people will sometimes do this. Like they should know. I never told you. I never told you. And part of that is to explain very quickly that when someone who's older always gets in the habit of saying, oh, I just can't remember that. Maybe it's because you never knew in the first place. But what happens when that happens? Cortisol, which is, think of it as a drip of acid that goes onto your hippocampus. That drip is maybe a tiny drip, but that little neural squirt of cortisol, of failure, I can't remember what a group of giraffes are. If somebody gets in the habit of doing that, that can tip them to cognitive decline and give them what we call false dementia. What's a group of giraffes, though? I'll tell you. A group of giraffes is called a tower. What's a group of hummingbirds? It's a shimmer.
Shimmer?
Shimmer. What's a group of squirrels? It's a scurry. What's a group of these? This was on purpose because of a book that was written by the brilliant Harvard educator. He deals in younger brains, but his book applies to ours. The title says it all: surprise, uncertainty, and mental structure. And here's how it works. If you have a life with no surprise and no uncertainty, you live in an assisted living, you live somewhere where things are done for you, you don't have to think, you lose track of the day because you got no surprise and no uncertainty. When you have pleasant surprise, pleasant uncertainty, something different, your mental structure stays healthy. And it doesn't have to be a lot, because a stagnant pond, you throw a rock into a stagnant pond, even a pebble, what happens? You get a ripple, but you have to do that every day, a little bit every day. Okay, squirrel, you know what that is. What's a group of lizards called?
Ugly.
Ugly, no, no, no. You're going to like this. Joan, you will not forget this. This may be the most popular. A group of lizards is called a lounge of lizards. Okay, everybody have chocolate?
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to make sure, I've got to jump ahead here to see where we are.
Oh, we did have
Okay, what you want to do is use all of your brain. I'll catch up the slides when we can. You want to use all of your brain because what we have with chocolate is something that is unique. It's one of the few things with This Is Your Brain on Chocolate that we can go back to the Central America where they used it as a syrup or a cocoa or a liquid. They did not have the chocolate you're going to enjoy. The coca tree, the beans are dried. Then the Europeans perfected what we now know as chocolate. They devised it so it would give this feeling, but they didn't know until the last decade that what it does is release chemicals that produce the same reaction that you have when you're in a euphoric state. And by knowing that, we can say, okay, enjoy it, but think of what you're eating, make sure you know what type of chocolate to eat, and you're going to know in a few minutes how your brain responds to chocolate. You can enjoy it. You can just enjoy it, or you can eat it like I'm going to tell you to with all of your brain. But at first I want to walk you through this. Anybody love candy bars? Well, everybody I think has a favorite, so I'm going to be asking you in a second. Use your brain. Raise your hand if you can tell me your favorite candy bar of all time. One bite of your favorite candy bar. What's yours?
M&M.
M&M.
Look.
Look. Do you do that even with fillings in your teeth? Oh, that's great. Joan.
Cadbury milk chocolate.
Cadbury. Okay. Who else has a favorite candy bar?
Heath bars.
Heath bars. How about some of these? Anybody got these? These are old classics. Some of them aren't even for sale in most markets anymore.
Clark.
Okay. Clark bar? Okay. I believe that if you took a sample of these classics that you haven't had for decades, blindfolded you and gave you a little bite about the size of a quarter, most people could remember. How can the brain remember? It's because you use all the brain. It's the feel, it's the crunch, it's the non-crunch, it's the nuts that are in it. You would examine it with all of your brain with what it feels and smells and tastes like. So we're going to do that with this single piece of chocolate. And if you understand candy bars, we used to, during our clinical trials, we used candy bars. And we had people experiment on whether they could remember. And in fact, the center of this picture was voted as the worst candy bar ever. Idaho Spud. Who's tasted an Idaho Spud? Who likes an Idaho Spud? Hands go down. The family, we researched this is a family-owned business. They still make a decent, handsome living, and they know it's terrible. Looks like a potato or something that dropped from a horse. It looks bad, and it's got this marshmallowy taste, but anyway, to each his own. Hershey's has never changed one bit of the formula that they have. So if somebody saw this and actually ate this, and then they're over 100 and they're eating a candy bar that's now wrapped like this, their brain could tell the difference in the taste test. And also note here, look at this.
Yeah.
More sustainable than meat. I guess they didn't have advertising rules back then. Okay, Whitman Sampler. Anybody remember Whitman Sampler?
Yeah.
Okay, how about C's?
Yeah.
Emotion. Remember your amygdala? If you have somebody who is feeling down and out and you find out what candy was served to their family and you bring in either one of these, or these are also some of the classic Russell Stover and some of those. Don't get a box like this, but just one little one that they can share with people. You will see their face light up because they think of Aunt Ruth, or they think of their grandma, or they think of the place that their family got together. And they'll all of a sudden take that trip, and it's really triggering those chemicals that start the process of the cogwheels moving. Romance. Anybody think that romance is connected with chocolate? I got news for you. It is. It is. And not just on Valentine's Day. What we have is Hershey's giving us a hint. Before the science was here, Hershey's named those kisses. Well, when I was giving my one and only lecture at Oxford years ago, this study came out. This is a study from Oxford, and these are EEG. You put them on the head, and you can measure brain wave intensity. And so what they did was have couples kiss. So you're sitting there with the brain wave, and they get the monitor baseline, and then you kiss someone, and they can tell where the reaction's coming from, and the intensity. They had some couples that were romantically engaged, some weren't. And so they've got a baseline of all these students. And then, right at the end of it, they said, they're coming in one more time. We got all the data we need. We got to pay them to come in here. Let's feed them some chocolate. And they said, let's see where in the brain the chocolate part is. So, and whether or not everybody has the same intensity. So they did that, and when the results came back in, they said, yeah, the intensity is different, but look at the location. It's the same place in the brain. The exact same place. So what do? You say, we got another set of data. We've got a horse race. We're going to compare this person's brain kissing versus this person's brain on chocolate, and guess which one won? Chocolate. Chocolate was the winner. So are you ready to eat your chocolate? It's better than a kiss, according to the experts. Okay. What you want to do is you want to slow down.
I just want to ask, was there a difference between men and women in any of these studies?
Good question. I don't think they ever separated them, but I'll bet they've still got the data. That would be interesting.
I mean, we know about women and chocolate. I just don't know if men, you know, all these men
Yeah,
feel
but
the
some of those
same.
professors would get in trouble. They think they might lose their tenure if they said that there was a difference. But I'll bet there would be. You got a question?
My wife's just had a stroke.
Okay.
We love dark chocolate.
Okay.
And she's in the hospital, and she said, I need a little chocolate. It gets me started on the day.
Give a hand. Tell her that science says she's on to something. Tell her about Madame Calmont, 122 and a half. But also tell her that when she wants that chocolate, what brand do you?
We got Pounds Plus, the darkest one at
Trader Joe's.
Trader Joe's.
Then stick with it. The sweet spot is 60 to 72%.
That's what,
Yeah.
72%.
Yeah. And if you go beyond it, it's more bitter. If you go under it, it's really not as good for your brain. But tell her that it is wonderful for brains, and you're going to see on here for strokes. It's wonderful for repairing the brain. But you have to slow down. Take your time. The reason you slow down is because the brain only travels at 224 miles an hour if you're in your 30s. Travels much slower if you're in your 50s, 60s, and 70s. And your brain, if you chew and swallow, does not have the time it takes to really absorb the intensity. And so you take your time, use all the brain by looking at it. Everybody look at it. We got to move. I got some things to talk about. Do you eat it already?
It's still here.
Okay. And I will tell you, you do not need to use your teeth on this one until the very end. Joan, make it quick.
You know, this could be considered torture.
It is.
An argument for that.
It is. Okay, I'm going to say it's probably banned by some treaty. Okay, what you want to do is to look at it now. Pull it up right about here. Lean forward. Pull it up and lean forward. Now watch me. Put your head back. Just hold it there. But where you can get to it in just a moment. Don't sniff it yet. Wait, we're not there. And I'd like to have you hold it in the palm of your hand, or hold it in your hand. And the reason I'm doing that is because you're creating what I call an odorant. Odorant are the molecules that we smell. And they barely go up. They will go up a little bit with heat, but they don't really propel. You have a cloud if you hold it in the same spot. So you have a cloud of chocolate odorants. This is chocolate that won't give off much of a cloud, but it's there. And what you want to do is know that, watch this. If I do this when I'm trying to really intensify the taste of chocolate, if I do this, the cloud's here. You see what I did? If I do this, there's not much compared to what it would be if I held it still. Put your nose in a moment into the cloud. Not yet. And what you want to do is to sniff. I'll count to 3, so everybody just slow down. I'm intensifying the cloud. What you want to do is you want to sniff 3 times gently enough to pull up the odorants, but keep them at the roof of your nose. And the reason is that the roof of your nose contains neurons that touch the outside world, and if you sniff like this, they go in your lungs. So So what you want to do is to gently now put your nose in the cloud and sniff 3 times. Nose in the cloud, sniff 3 times. Shut your eyes even, because what you're doing is concentrating. Now put the small piece on your tongue. Put some of it on your tongue and don't use your teeth. It's designed to melt at between 94 and 97. If you put it on your tongue and shut your mouth, you have an oven. You've created an oven that is letting it melt. And the odors go up the back of your throat with every exhale, and you'll get an intense. If you want to do this with some kids, you have them shut their nose for just a moment and then let them breathe out. It's like a thunderclap that gets to their brain, because when you're breathing out, you get the most intense sense of smell. Once you've let it savor, now you can chew it slowly if you want to grind it up a little bit, but try to make sure what you're doing is examining the difference in the taste. And Trader Joe's would be different from another, any type of, Moonstruck, for instance. If you compared the two, your wife would know the difference because you're used to the Trader Joe's. You savor the finish, just like a wine taster would. That finish changes. And you know, every one of you has a different taste sensation based on 2 things. One is that your brain has experienced things. Maybe you've tasted this before. We're going to tell them what brand it is in just a minute. Maybe you've tasted, maybe you haven't, so your brain different. The other reason that we all taste different is because we all possess a secret ingredient. One that's unique to you when you taste anything. What do you think that is? Spit. Spit. It's the saliva in your mouth will actually alter the taste of anything. So when you say, I love this, and somebody says, how can you stand it? Maybe it's that they have a chemical reaction. But when you find something you love, like your wife loves that one, and it is a passionate point, and you've got all the studies behind me that show that it is something that's going to raise her euphoria level. Make sure the doctors say that she can have those all day, every day, little pieces every so often. Okay, you can just enjoy it now. Okay, here's the science behind chocolate, and it does all this good stuff. We've got studies on every one of these. One of the newer ones is an anti-inflammatory, and the brain needs that. Here's the one on strokes, and this comes from Toronto, that it lowers the likelihood of both future strokes and repeat strokes for someone who's had one in the future. We think what it does is it opens up. There are chemicals that open up the capillaries in the brain. This is an effective one from Johns Hopkins, that when they gave people chocolate and then didn't give them, the mechanisms that they saw get jump-started seemed to continue. It opened a pathway. And one more, and then I'll answer a question. This is one that I always caution. It's good. It's solid. It comes from San Diego, which is the U.S.'s top teaching university for neuroscience. This one might need to have an expert in diabetes because it's such a personal matter. But if your doctor thinks that chocolate is bad for diabetes, have them look to a dark chocolate and have them read these studies. Question back there.
I was going to ask, does any of this apply to people like with epilepsy or seizures? The same kind of results?
I don't know. Good question. Right now there's so much in the pipeline with substances, with foods, and they're trying all sorts of things. You're going to hear in a moment about some of the spices they're working on, that I wouldn't be surprised if we'll hear about that. But there's a couple of different things that are coming in the area of nutrition that I do want to talk. How much time do I have these brains?
Well, generally we stay until 12, so if people, we had planned until 11.
Okay, then what I'm going to do is...
Say 5 more minutes.
Okay, so I have them till 5 till? Okay, this is the last brain break of this.
Okay.
And this is a PowerPoint that I did. Golda Radner has groups of people called the laugh clubs, where they use laughter as a therapy. Grand Rapids is one of the bases, and we went back to do a Golda Radner laugh fest for cancer. And we gave 2 lectures, one at the college level on This Is Your Brain on Laughter, and one was on was for the cancer survivors downtown and their families. And that was one of the ones where I saw what they're talking about with laughter. If you can have laughter that's put into almost any situation, but the laughter shouldn't be something that is overwhelming the topic, but there is no topic I've seen that is too serious for laughter. And so this is the one that we sometimes will put up there as though I'm talking. I'll be talking, and I point out when somebody reads this, and a few people then start laughing, I'll say, what's up there, as though I don't know what's up there. What that does is allow me to then talk to them about something serious, so it doesn't take long to do that.